realize that people are thinking about this. It's very hard to work on this issue in many ways because it requires a complete change in so many things that we all do or take for granted every day. So it's wonderful to see you all. Back in 1995, I met a scientist, a Monsanto scientist, who said, if we have the best-selling herbicide in the world, what do you expect us to do? What we're going to do is we're going to produce crops that resist that herbicide, and then we can spray it absolutely everywhere, and we will have a farming system whereby people will buy packages. They'll get the herbicide and the seeds all together, and they'll have to sign contracts that mean that we control the whole process. And that's basically what they aim to do, and what I'm here to do is to say something about the impacts of that on Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, vast countries that had wonderful agriculture of their own, that were producing plenty of food for their people. The diet, for example, of a country like Ecuador, which I happen to know is so diverse. Argentina has ceased to be a diverse food producer and has become a country dominated by 24 million hectares of land devoted to GM crops. That's out of 33 million hectares of arable land. That's quite a large amount. And do you know what much of that is for? Much of that is for animal feed and biofuel. And anyone here who drives a car will be putting biofuel into their car, whether they want to or not. They won't have any choice about where that biofuel comes from or the impacts that it has on people. They will be putting it into their car. And we have been given no choice in that matter. And it's the same with the animal feed. With that, any eggs or chickens or cheese, milk and meat that you buy in a supermarket is likely to have been fed with that GM soy that comes from Argentina, Paraguay and Brazil, because Brazil produces both GM and non-GM. And if I tell you what the impacts of producing that animal feed, for which we have specially bred animals that can't survive without it and which are sick and which die early and which are only really produced to make either 8,000 litres of milk a year or meat. It's just extraordinary that the process that we've allowed ourselves to get captured in. So now we have animals that are specially designed to take this food, and they are locked up for the most part in what a friend of mine from Brazil used to call chicken or cattle concentration camps. This is how it is with all this. This is the chain that we have got involved in. This is the chain that the supermarkets are involved in. These are the chains that we have to break. And it's not so difficult to break them, but it means that every one of us has to do something. Every one of us has to do something every day to keep it in mind, because in Argentina, hundreds of thousands of farmers have been driven off their land. Thousands of people have had their houses burnt down. They've been violently displaced from their land. They've been beaten up, and some of them have been killed. They've been driven into the city slums, where they've got nothing, absolutely nothing. I've seen families in Argentinian streets picking rubbish up off the street because that's all they can do. Whole families down to children of 3 years old. It's a complete scandal. It's the same in Paraguay.
Colombia too.
In Paraguay and in Colombia, you say? My goodness. And Bolivia, I know. What Syngenta once called the Republic of Soy. That's Syngenta. That was many years ago. Colombia wasn't included in that. If it's also true in Colombia, you see how this disease is spreading everywhere. In Paraguay, indigenous people live on the rubbish dump in Asunción because they have nothing else. They've been driven off their land. In Paraguay, again, the same thing. People not able to grow their own crops because pesticide drift from the aerial spraying that happens every single day is affecting their crops and their animals. And in a sense, we are responsible for that. Because we've taken on a food chain about which we have not asked enough questions. The same is true in Brazil, to some extent. Brazil is a contradiction in many ways. There is non-GM soya in Brazil, and we'll come to that in a moment. But in the south of Brazil, they grow a lot of GM. In fact, it was Brazilian farmers who first went to Paraguay and Argentina and started to grow it there. Now they're growing it in massive quantities in Brazil. And Brazil, which is an extraordinary country with much diversity and with very good agriculture in some places, Brazil has taken the first step towards two very dangerous developments in this whole field. One of them is terminator technology. Brazil is discussing whether to agree on terminator technology being permitted. A colleague of mine who works, my colleague Ricardo, who works on terminator technology back in the past, said they weren't able to string it together to make it work. But it sends a signal out to the world, and if it doesn't work, that will be even worse if it works in a piecemeal manner. The idea is suicide seeds. Seeds that will not grow if you put them in the soil. What kind of violence and violation is that? It's just extraordinary what they're planning for us. And the other